بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Hadith number 1052 وعن عمر ibn al-Khattab رضي الله عنه. From Umar ibn al-Khattab رضي الله عنه, he makes this statement: أنه خطب فقال إن الله بعث محمدا بالحق. He stood up giving a khutbah and he said, Verily Allah sent Muhammad with the truth. وأنزل عليه الكتاب, and he sent down on him the book. فكان فيما أنزل الله عليه آية الرجم, and from that which Allah sent down on him was the ayah of the rajm, the stoning to death. فقرأناها ووعيناها وأقلناها. We recited it, we grasped it, and we understood it. فرجم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ورجمنا بعده. So the Prophet carried out this punishment, and we carried out this punishment after him. فأخشى إن طال بالناس زمان أن يقول قائل ما نجد الرجم في كتاب الله فيضل بالترك فريضة أنزلها الله. And I fear, Umar says, that after a long time passes, somebody from the people will say, we do not find this ayah of rajm in the Quran, and so they will become misguided by leaving off a farida, or an obligatory action which Allah has sent down. وَإِنَّ الرَّجْمَ حَقٌّ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى عَلَى مَنْ زَنَى إِذَا أَحْصَنَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ إِذَا قَامَتِ الْبَيِّنَةُ أَوْ كَانَ الْحَبْلُ أَوْ الْاعْتِرَافُ. مُتَّفَقٌ عَلَيْهِ. And verily the stoning is a right in the book of Allah against the one who commits zina if he is a muhsan, be this person a male or a female, if the evidence has been established, or there is pregnancy, or there is a confession. Muttafaqun alayh. This narration is incredibly valuable because of the lessons which we can take from it, and also the points of benefit which arise from this narration. Notice here that Umar ibn al-Khattab is giving a khutbah to the people. It is most likely a khutbah of the Salat al-Jum'ah. He says that Allah sent Muhammad with the truth. Notice he mentions the Prophet using his name, but in the Quran, Allah Jalla wa Ala forbids us from calling out to the Prophet using his name. لا تجعلوا دعاء الرسول بينكم كدعاء بعضكم بعضا. Do not make the calling of the Prophet among you as you call one another. In other words, don't call him by his name. Rather, you should address him as Ya Rasulullah. But of course, there's no contradiction here because Umar is not addressing the Prophet here. He is speaking about the Prophet in the third person. We learn from this narration that the ayah of Rajm was initially sent down in the Quran. But of course we don't find it now because the wording has been abrogated, but the ruling remains. And this narration is clear evidence of this, that the ruling still remains. And this is important to note because somebody might ask, perhaps then that the ruling is also abrogated, just like the wording. Because what's the point in just abrogating the wording without the ruling? Well, here we find that the ruling has not been abrogated, because if it had been abrogated, then Umar ibn al-Khattab would not have made this statement. He would not have said that the Prophet carried out the punishment of stoning and we carried it out after him. But if it had been abrogated, then they would not have carried it out after him. This narration clearly means to tell us that the ruling is still in effect. Somebody might say, but perhaps this is Umar's own opinion, and we are not necessarily obligated to follow his opinion. Well, the problem with that argument is that remember that Umar ibn al-Khattab is giving a khutbah in front of the other companions, and we do not find that anyone has rejected this opinion. Thus it would follow that this ruling of the rajm is not abrogated in any companion's opinion, and we do not know any companion who has argued against this idea, meaning arguing against the idea that the rajm is established in the Quran and the Sunnah. We also take that the khutbah of the Salat al-Jum'ah, which is most probably what this would have been, is undertaken by the Khalifa, because at that time Umar ibn al-Khattab was the Khalifa. He talks about the ayah being sent down. What is this ayah? Well, previously we did mention the ayah, or at least what has been suggested as the ayah of rajm, and we said that it appears that this is not in fact what was sent down. So the upshot of it all is that the stoning to death is applicable for all times and places. And if anyone was to say that this stoning was only applicable in those times and days, and not in our day and age, then this is kufr. It takes them outside the fold of Islam, because they're saying that there are parts of this sharia which have not been abrogated, yet still they are not applicable to this day and age. Whereas Allah Jalla wa Ala says that today I have perfected your deen for you and completed my favor upon you. So how is it then that Allah is saying one thing and these people are saying something which is diametrically opposed to the ayah of Allah Jalla wa Ala? So this is complete kufr. And there are plenty of quote-unquote Muslims out there who may look like Muslims and may pretend to be so, but the point is that they are complete zanadiqa. They are complete and utter hypocrites who are kuffar from inside, and they are just hiding their true kufr inner convictions and simply sugarcoating it with Islamic titles. As for the kuffar, then of course they will find this punishment inappropriate and completely out of tune with their way of living, but this is because fornication and adultery is in tune with their way of living, so of course the punishment for these acts will be out of tune for their way of living. We take from what Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh said, that the rajm is not established for all cases of zina, rather it is only established for the one who is muhsan. And you'll remember, we gave the 5 conditions for a person to be muhsan. One of the biggest issues which comes out from this narration is that Umar ibn al-Khattab mentions 3 ways in which the punishment can be established. And these 3 ways which he mentions, number 1 is the bayyina, or the proof, and these are the 4 just men witnesses. The second way is al-habl, or pregnancy, so a woman becomes pregnant from a zina. And the third way is al-i'tiraf, which is simply confessing. Now when it comes to 2 of these, the evidence or the confession, then this is clear enough that the punishment can be established. The pregnancy, however, is much more controversial. However, with all 3 of these ways, we need to speak about them in a bit more detail. But before that, let us just pull back and talk about the 3 conditions which must be met before the had punishment is obligatory. And these 3 conditions are on top of the general conditions for the had punishment to be established on somebody. Note that the general conditions is that the person needs to be baligh, aqil, multazim, which is a person on whom the Islamic law is obligatory to abide by, and also alim bit tahrim, somebody who knows that this action is haram. So these are 4 conditions, but with regards to zina, we have to add 3 more conditions. So number 1, that the man must make penetration such that the tip of his private part enters the woman's private part. And this genitalia which we're talking about are the original genitalia of the people. So for example, you could have a hermaphrodite who has both types of genitalia, but one of them is the original one and the other is the excess body part. So if he commits zina with the excess body part, this does not count as zina. It needs to be the original body part. And this works with the front passage and the back passage, like we said before. In other words, zina takes place in the front passage and the back passage. So the basic point here is that there needs to be penetration involved. And the amount of penetration is simply the front part or the head of the male genitalia. So notice then that merely touching the genitalia together does not obligate the had punishment. You need to have the front part of the genitalia entering into the female genitalia. So merely touching is not good enough to establish the had punishment. And also, when we speak about this genitalia, we are speaking about the penetration of human beings. So if somebody has sexual intercourse with an animal, and this can happen, and it does happen with some people, then this does not obligate the had punishment, which is the either 100 lashing or the stoning to death. As for having intercourse with an animal, then this is also forbidden, just like zina is, and the evidence is the generality of the ayah, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. those people who preserve their chastity except with their wives or their servant women, but whoever seeks other than that, then they are the transgressors. And of course, having intercourse with an animal is other than that. So we are talking about the human genitalia. However, we make an exception here with regards to the dhatu mahram, those women who are so closely related to you that you're never allowed to marry them. Because with these types of women, if you were to have intercourse with them, the ruling is different. It is not the normal had punishment. So with this condition, we do have to make an exception. So we'll basically say that it is a human genitalia. So we basically say that it has to be the full head part of the male genitalia penetrating into the female genitalia, and both of these are the asli or the original genitalia as opposed to the excess one, which some people could be born with. And this penetration must be from human to human in order for the had punishment to be established. So the same ruling does not apply to animals. And then also an exception we make, that the penetration of your mahram female relatives does not incur the had punishment. Rather, the ruling there is different. So here's a question: what if a man has intercourse with a dead woman? Is he given the had punishment? There's a difference of opinion here. One opinion says, no, he's not given the had punishment because the woman is dead. And so it is not exactly the same as an act of conventional zina, in which Allah Jalla wa Ala says, الزانية والزاني فاجلدوا كل واحد منهما مئة جلدة. The female and male fornicator, whip each of them 100 lashes. So this opinion says that he's not given the had punishment, however, it is still a haram action which he has committed. So this person is simply given a ta'zir punishment, which is whatever punishment the Imam feels is appropriate. The second opinion says he definitely should be given the had punishment, because first of all for committing zina, and then secondly for violating the sanctity of the dead. So he's committed two actions which are horrid, and so for this reason he should be given the had punishment. So these are the two opinions, and if a situation like this was to occur, then the Imam in the particular area would make his ijtihad and choose from one of these opinions, which he deems to be the weightier. So we say with this first condition about the head of the male genitalia disappearing into the female genitalia, we can break it down into 5 ingredients. Firstly, like we said, the head must disappear into the female genitalia, which is the asli, meaning it is not an excess body part. Number 2, it can be either the front passage or the back passage in which the penetration takes place. Number 3, that the genitalia are the asli and not the excess body part. Number 4, it must be human with human. And number 5, they must both be living. And of course, on that 5th point, there is a difference of opinion. However, just for the sake of completion, we'll add this here. So in this first condition, there are 5 essential ingredients which we have mentioned. So make a note of that. So all of that was the first condition. Then the second condition is that there must not be any doubtful matters, or there must not be any shubha. And this shubha can be divided into 2 types. Shubhatul aqd, which is the doubt concerning the contract itself, the marriage contract. And the second one, shubhatul i'tiqad, which is the doubt concerning the belief. So for example, a man has intercourse believing that this intercourse is halal, whereas in actuality it is haram. So these are the 2 types of shubuhat. So the shubhatul aqd, firstly, this is when a man has intercourse with his wife and he believes that this contract of the marriage is correct, whereas in fact it is fasid. And so in actuality, this woman is not halal for him to have intercourse with. For example, a man marrying a woman, and then it transpires that this woman is his sister through breastfeeding. And in fact, a situation like this did happen at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet separated between the two. The shubhatul i'tiqad could be that a woman is in bed and it is dark. He thinks that she is his wife, so he has intercourse with her, and then it works out that this was a completely different woman. So the point is that in both of these types of shubuha, the had punishment is not established, because from the conditions of the had punishment, and this is the second one, is that there must be no shubha. And we do have a weak hadith, which in fact is coming up in Bulugh al-Maram, but we'll quote it here because it is relevant, in which the Prophet is reported to have said, "Idra'u al-hududa 'anil muslimina bish-shubuhati mastata'tum." Ward off the had punishments from the Muslims as much as you can if there are some doubtful matters or shubuhat. And it is a good thing that this hadith is weak, because if we were to take it as sahih, then this will open up the doors to the people of desires, because every case of a had punishment will bring its doubtful matters. And so some people will bring forth certain doubtful matters and highlight it and blow it all out of proportion, and they will argue, well, this is a doubtful case, therefore we cannot establish the had punishment. And so if we go down that road, we could find that all cases of the had punishment are closed, and the had punishment is never established. So the point is, we don't totally rely on this hadith, as it is weak, but nevertheless, these two types of doubts do give the person in question the benefit of the doubt. And with these two types of shubuhat, the blame does not lie on the person who carried out this act, because your intentions are judged by your actions and you receive what you intended, and this person in both of these doubtful matters did not intend to commit zina. He did not intend to violate the law of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Another type of doubtful matter would be that if we have a servant girl and there are two different men who own her, so she works for both of them, then it is not permissible for any one of these men to take her as a concubine. You can only do that if you solely own her, and none of these two are allowed to marry her either. This woman is allowed to get married to a third person who does not own her, if both of these owners agree that she can marry this third person. But the point here is that the owners, two of them, both are not allowed to have intercourse with this servant woman. But what many scholars say in a case like this is that if one of them was to have intercourse with her, then the had punishment would not be established on him because of the shubha that he owns this servant girl. So they say it is not established on him even if he knew that it is not permissible for him to have intercourse with this servant girl, but because he owns her, or at least part of her, so in our case it's 50-50, then this ownership prevents the had punishment from being established. They also say that if we have a man who has a son, and this son has a servant girl, but he shares in the ownership of this servant girl with another man, so let's say 50-50, then if the father of this man who shares in the ownership of the servant girl was to have intercourse with this woman, then again the had punishment would not be established on the father. Why is this? Because they say that the father has the ability to take possession of the wealth of the son. So if that's the case, then the father could take possession of the servant girl and have intercourse with her. And so this is a shubha. So they say that even though the son does not have full ownership of this servant girl, if the father was to have intercourse with the servant girl, the had punishment still would not be established on him, because the wealth of the son is indirectly the wealth of the father. So if the had punishment would not be established in the first scenario which we gave, then it should also not be established in this second scenario of the father. And with all of this, they base it on the shubha. So in other words, they say that these are mitigating factors which would prevent the had punishment. As for the shubhatul i'tiqad, if the man commits zina and then he's brought before the imam, and then the man says that I thought she was my wife, but I was mistaken, so this is the shubhatul i'tiqad. Therefore he says he's not entitled to the had punishment. Do we believe him? Well, the point is, in cases like these, we have to look at the indications. If we have indications to suggest that this is a valid argument he's coming out with, then we will accept it. If indications tell us otherwise, then we do not accept it. For example, if he has intercourse with this woman, and we know that this woman was screaming, telling this man to get off him, telling him that she is not his wife, or something to that effect, then this is a strong indication that this is not a wat or shubha, an instance of fornication in which there is doubt. As for the Shubhatul Aqd, then it is as we have said, that they think this is a valid contract, whereas it is not. The Hanabila ulama have divided this marriage contract up into two types. They say one type is fasid and the other type is batil. The batil type of marriage contract is a contract in which we have a consensus that it is invalid. For example, marrying a woman in her iddah period, or for example, marrying your blood sister. There is no alim or scholar who disagrees that this is an invalid contract. So we say that this is batil. As for a fasid contract, the Hanabila ulama say that this is a contract in which there is a difference of opinion as to whether it is invalid or not. For example, marrying a woman without her wali. The vast majority of the scholars, and definitely the correct opinion, is that this marriage contract is invalid. But some scholars from the Ahnaf, they say it is valid. So in a case like this, we label this contract as fasid, and we would not separate between the two, because with some scholars this is a valid marriage contract, but rather the separation would have to result by a divorce. So then everybody would be in no doubt whatsoever that the marriage has ended, because when the divorce occurs, then of course the marriage ends. Whereas if we were to just separate them, just like that, without a divorce, then there would be some people who would think that this woman and this man are still married, and this marriage contract has not been annulled, because it was, for them, a valid marriage contract, and you cannot just split two people apart in a valid marriage contract. Whereas, on the other hand, with a batil marriage contract, then everybody agrees that this is invalid, therefore we don't need a divorce, we can just simply separate between them. Another example of a fasid marriage contract is that a man marries a woman and both of them were breastfed by the same woman. However, they were breastfed 3 sucklings. Now the question is, do 3 sucklings create the hurma, or is it 5 sucklings which create the hurma? There's a difference of opinion, and we discussed this issue before in the chapter of Ar-Rada'ah. So those ulama who hold that it does create the hurma, they would say that this man and woman are not allowed to be married because they are brothers and sisters. As for those ulama who hold that 5 sucklings create the hurma, then they will say that this man and woman are allowed to be married because they are not brothers and sisters from breastfeeding. So the question is this marriage valid or invalid? The ulama say that this type of marriage would be fasid because there's a difference of opinion as to whether it is valid or not, and we would not say that it is batil. Or what about this example? A woman demands a khula' from the man, and so they agree, she pays back the mahr, and they are separated. What is the waiting period for the mukhtala'ah, the woman who has been separated with a khula'? According to the weightier opinion, it is 1 haydah, 1 menstrual cycle, because we have evidence from the text that this is how long Fatima bint Qais was waiting after the khula'. However, some ulama say that it is 3 menstrual cycles, and this is the Hanbali madhab. So what if a second man comes along and marries this woman just after she completes the first menstrual cycle? Is this marriage contract valid? Well, if you are of the opinion that the iddah for the mukhtala'ah is 1 haydah, then this is a valid marriage contract. If you're of the opinion that it is 3 menstrual cycles, then this is not a valid marriage contract. And so therefore, we would not be allowed to just simply separate between the two as if it was a batil marriage contract. Rather, they can only be separated via a divorce. What about this situation? That a man believes, in accordance with his fiqh, that this particular marriage contract is haram, but he goes ahead with it anyway because of his desires. And he simply says that because this particular marriage contract has a difference of opinion, on this one particular occasion, I'll adopt the other opinion and go ahead with this marriage contract. So for example, he really likes this woman, and he's of the opinion that 3 sucklings create the hurma. And this woman was breastfed by the same woman who breastfed this man. But this woman in question was breastfed 3 sucklings. So in accordance with the fiqh of this man, this woman is haram for him to marry. But he says to himself, because he likes this woman, that he'll go along with the opinion that 5 sucklings create the hurma. So in this case now he is allowed to marry her. And so this is what he does, he marries her. Now, we have 2 issues here. Firstly, is what he did is it haram or not? Well, the answer is yes, because he did not follow the text, he followed his desires. And this idea of playing leapfrog, jumping from one opinion to the other in accordance with your desires, is not following the text of Islam. It is in reality following your desires. Rather, the only reason in which you could change from one madhab to another madhab on any one particular opinion is if you believe that that opinion is the correct opinion, not that which is simply in accordance with your desires. So notice the difference. So the first issue is that yes, he certainly did do something which is haram, and he will be taken into account for this. But then we have the second issue, is this a valid nikah contract or not, or do we simply just separate between them? Remember that this man, in accordance with his fiqh, is that this marriage contract is haram, but he's simply hiding behind the smokescreen of the other opinion here. Is he given the had punishment for zina if he has intercourse in this marriage contract? Well, the answer still here is no, he would not, because there is a difference of opinion as to whether this contract is valid or not. So this creates this shubha, or this doubtful matter. And hence we would not establish the had punishment on him, although he is still sinful. Because it could be that in actuality, with Allah Jalla wa Ala, this marriage contract in which he has entered is in fact valid. Okay, so all of these examples were when you think that this woman is a wife of yours but she's not, or when you think that the marriage contract is valid but in fact it is not, or if there is a difference of opinion as to whether the marriage contract is valid. But either way, it is pertaining to your wife. What about those shubuhat pertaining to the servant girl which you own? So just like we could have a difference of opinion as to whether the marriage contract is correct, we could also have a difference of opinion as to whether this servant girl is under your rightful ownership or not. And we have examples of this as well. So for example, if he purchases a servant girl after the second or the final adhan of the Salat al-Jum'ah, well, we know that the sales transactions after the Salat al-Jum'ah are haram, and their presence is like the absence. So in other words, this sales contract then is haram. So if it is haram, then does that mean that she is not in actuality his servant girl, because he does not own her? Well, some scholars say that the contract is haram, but the ownership does take place. So even though he committed a sin, but the servant girl is still under his possession. So we did have a transferal of ownership. So based upon this then, if he has intercourse with this concubine of his, we would not establish the had punishment because of the difference of opinion. If this purchaser, meaning the man, thought that this sales contract is sahih, then the servant girl remains with him. If in his fiqh opinion this sales contract was batil, then in this case we would take the servant girl away from him and return her to the seller. But in either case, the had punishment is not established because of the shubha. Another example, if a servant girl is sold in the masjid. So a person owns a servant girl, he says to another man, I'll sell her to you for such and such a price, and they both agree to this, then the sales transaction has taken place. Only the problem is it took place in the masjid. And the Prophet gave an emphatic prohibition not to conduct sales transactions in the masjid. Thus we would say its presence is like its absence. However, they go along with it, and he takes the servant girl and he has intercourse with her as his concubine. Well, we say definitely the sales contract is haram and they both committed a haram action, but some ulama say that the transferal of ownership does take place. The weightier opinion is that it does not take place, but because we have a difference of opinion, that would need to be respected, and so the had punishment would not be established on this man if he has intercourse with his concubine, because of the possibility that in actuality with Allah, the transferal of ownership did take place. And so this is a shubha which serves as a mitigating factor. Another example is at-tasarruf al-fuduli, and this is something we discussed in the chapter of the sales transaction. So we'll give an example. A person has a servant girl and he's been intending to sell the servant girl. This person also has a wakil, somebody working on his behalf, conducting his transactions, and this wakil finds a suitable customer and he sells the servant girl to the customer without seeking the permission of the rightful owner. Now, afterwards the owner finds out that the servant girl has been sold, and the owner approves of this sale. The question is this sales contract valid or not? Because the point is that it took place without the permission of the owner. This is the issue. So some scholars say no, this sales contract is not valid because there was no permission from the owner. And some ulama say, yes, it is valid if the owner gives permission, even if it is after the trade. So if he gets to know about it after the trade and he gives the permission, then we say that the sales contract will be valid from the time it took place, not from the time that the owner gave the permission or he gave his seal of approval, which was of course after the sales contract. So the point is that the purchaser, if he has intercourse with this concubine of his, then is the had punishment established? The answer is no, because of this shubha, due to the difference of opinion as to whether this sales contract is correct or not. So these three examples were pertaining to when the ownership of a servant woman is questionable, or that there is a difference of opinion as to whether the ownership is valid. So we have examples as to whether the nikah contract is valid, and we have examples as to whether the ownership of a servant girl is valid. And all of these serve as shubuhat, and so the had punishment is not established. Okay, what about another situation? If the woman is forced to have intercourse with a man who is not her husband, nor her sayyid or her owner. Well, in a case like this, we would punish the person who is forcing her. So he is committing a haram action, but the had will not be established on the woman because she did not do it out of her own will, and she did not have the intention of committing zina. Notice here, however, that raping a woman is not the same as fornicating with a woman. The had punishment is for fornication, not for raping. Rather, raping is far worse, and the imam would be well within his rights to kill the rapist. Because if the death penalty can be given for adultery, and adultery takes place with mutual consent, then what about rape, which does not take place through mutual consent? What if a man forces a woman to commit zina? So he sticks a gun to her head and he says, commit zina with this other man, otherwise I'll shoot you. And the same thing could happen with a man as well. One man forces the second man to commit zina with a woman. So it could work both ways. Well, in both cases, the one who is being forced is not subjected to the had punishment. But what about the third person who is forcing them? Well, he's not subjected to the had punishment of zina because he didn't actually commit zina. But nevertheless, he is given a ta'zir punishment because of this repulsive haram action which he committed. So let us just recap what we have spoken about. We said that there are three broad conditions before the had punishment can be established, and this is in addition to the general conditions. We have thus far spoken about two of them. The first one was the genitalia entering and penetrating into the female genitalia, and this had 5 essential ingredients. And then the second condition was that there must not be any shubuhat, which we have just spoken about. And so now this leaves us with the third condition, which is what the narration of Umar is speaking about. In other words, how is the zina established or proven? But before that, let's take some review questions. So question number 1. If someone were to come up to you and say that there is no stoning to death because we simply do not find it in the Quran, how might you respond? Question number 2. We said that in addition to the general 4 conditions, or perhaps 3, depending on how you number it, of the had punishment to be established, zina has a further 3 more. Simply state these 3 conditions. Question number 3. If a man penetrates a dead woman, is this counted as zina? Question number 4. If a man believes a particular marriage contract to be haram in his madhab, but goes ahead with it anyway because of his desires, then if this marriage contract is mukhtalafun fi, meaning there is a difference of opinion, then is the man treated as a fornicator if he consummated this marriage? Explain the answer.